Warning: the following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Accordingly, viewer discretion is advised.
Creepers. So yeah, this story today is definitely viewer discretion as advised. We've done some pretty creepy stories. Well, first and foremost, how the heck are you guys? It is Creeper, and I'm back, and I'm creeping around Southeast Portland today. And what brings me here, what I was just gonna kind of say, was this neighborhood, Southeast Portland, has a ton of history, and a lot of the history through here is actually pretty darn creepy. A lot of these homes are really old and have been around for quite some time. Which brings me to another creepy tale that happened right here in Southeast Portland. We're gonna get up a little bit closer to the actual residence where this kind of story, creepy story, takes place. So stay tuned, today's definitely gonna be a good one. So I wanted to kind of start the vlog a lot sooner than we normally would when we go to a place, just so I have a little bit more time to talk to you guys about the backstory of this creepy residence. And like I said, we've done some really creepy vlogs throughout the years and visited a lot of different places here directly in Southeast that have a pretty interesting, weird vibe, creepiness story to them. But I think this one kind of takes the cake. So the beginning of this story takes us back to August 29th of 1975. There is a boarding house, kind of like a bed and breakfast would be today, here in Southeast Portland, that hosted a ton of folks and residents, if you will. And the residents would pay their bills monthly, just like anybody renting or, you know, any kind of bill situation. And so they would sometimes mail their rent checks in or physically deliver them to this particular house. And on this particular day, it had been a good couple months before any of the residents would receive any kind of withdrawals in their account or any kind of notices of why their payments weren't being accepted. The tenants were having their money actually, you know, deducted from their accounts or however. And in fact, a lot of the tenants would go and pay in person and drop their, you know, slips off through like a box or what have you. But months went by with none of these, you know, transactions kind of happening. So the Portland police got the call to basically go do a welfare check. That's the word I was looking for. So when the detective showed up, you know, he went to the front door, knocked on the door, and there was, you know, no reply. So he kind of hung back, and as he was doing his notes and stuff, he saw that there was like a little side yard or whatever. So he went around to the back just for good measure to make sure everything was, you know, on the up and up. And as he actually peeked through the back window, he saw a body. That's right, he saw a body laying on the floor. And, you know, like I said, the residents that were paying their rent at the time had no money deducted. So for 3 months or longer, you know, this body could have been there. And when we get up here closer to the residence, I'll tell you guys more about the rest of this creepy story. You're gonna want to stay tuned. It definitely gets a lot more creepy. All right, guys, we are super close. Actually, it's right here on the corner. Okay, so this house right here would have been the house that Bessie Mae Staley lived at with her caregiver
/ significant other, even though they were never married. 68-year-old Charles Lewis would help her with her daily activities. She was actually suffering from memory loss throughout the years. She owned a restaurant inside the grotto, and he was the bookkeeper and ended up moving into this home with her. She lived upstairs and he lived downstairs at the time, but when the police came to make the welfare check, The detective first knocked on the front door, then went around back and knocked on the back door. When he peeked his head through the back door, he saw Charles Lewis laying face down.
He was actually alive when the paramedics came, so it looked like he had maybe had a stroke of some sort. But when the paramedics were basically, looking through the residence for if there was any more folks around, one of the residents that came to pay their bills pulled up and asked the detective, well, what about Bessie? And at the time he says, I don't know anything about, this particular person you're talking about. So apparently the detective went upstairs to the bedroom, and there was a door that was really old, kind of wooden door that had full of cobwebs and all kinds of rust. And he noticed under this door that there was a rag, and there was also a really terrible stench coming from inside the building itself, and a smell that he said he would never forget later on in articles. But right up top here, when the detective approached the building, or the room, he also noticed that there was windows, which would have been these windows here, that were actually screwed shut. And there was also a ton of rags, old, like dirty, gross rags, shoved into all the window vents and also the heater vents. And on his further inspection, as he entered the room, he said it was basically something like out of a horror movie. He could not believe his eyes. There was actually a canary cage up inside the room as well. And this bird that was in there, a yellow canary, was completely turned into like a little skeleton. Obviously had been neglected and died. And when he turned over, as he was looking at couldn't believe his eyes what he was seeing, he noticed a figure that he really couldn't see very well because of all the dirt and dust and everything that covered the room. But when he looked, he realized he saw 2 feet sticking out of like a really worn piece of material, almost like some sort of clothing that was rotten. And on further inspection, he actually saw right up here in one of these windows the remains of Bessie Mae Staley. That's right. And when the officers finally came to remove the body, it was completely a skeleton. There was nothing left. There was no, stomach, brain matter, anything. The detective said that the maggots had actually really covered, done their work, and really basically just all that was left was the skeletal remains. Now, years later, the detective would actually try and go to the hospital where George was at, basically in a vegetation state at this point. He was completely incoherent. The detective would ask him questions just to see if he could get any kind of information by any kind of looks or anything out of him, a gesture, a handwritten thing, nothing. And right up top here is where all that went down. And for years later, the detective really thought that she was murdered, and basically couldn't prove it because of all the evidence and everything leaving the body, just the skeletal remains. And I'm gonna walk away now because this story is not only creeping me out, but I don't really want to linger around the property too much, just out of respectful measures and stuff. But anyways, so they, for years this detective was trying so hard to figure out why this body was left. And the coroner said that her body actually had been up there for at least 3 years, just completely deteriorating and rotting. So pretty darn scary and spooky. But the detectives never did figure out as to why or how she died. There was basically no evidence remaining, but just a skeletal remains in the bed for 3 years. And with everything being sealed up with the rags and everything, made it to where no one really knew what was going on. It was also said that the residents that lived around the neighborhood there really never saw them come or go. He had a lot of his stuff delivered to the back door there, which I think gave the detective, you know, a little bit more insight as to probably was a murder, you know, not to say for sure, because I don't have all the evidence and I don't want to, like, you know, falsely like accuse somebody of a crime, but you know, by the looks of it, if you know you've got a body in your house for 3 years, whether she died or you murdered her or whatever, I mean, it's in there. And another piece of the story that was really interesting to me was, you know, the detective knew right away that something other than obviously the obvious, like the rags being shoved under the doors and in the heater vents to kind of like maybe, I don't know, keep the smell away or something. I don't know what the heck the means of that was, but the canary being dead obviously was neglected, you know, so obviously either the door got shut and locked and she basically just starved to death, or just died. I don't know. It's pretty creepy though. And like I said, that officer, well, detective, has a lot of really interesting stories from a lot of these houses around here in Southeast Portland. And that house in particular, I've walked by at least a dozen times, if not more, and you know, would have never known something like that happened. Basically right here in this beautiful little neighborhood of Sunnyside. So basically just a really creepy story. And like I said, they never did figure out if she was, you know, murdered or if she just died of natural causes and he didn't want to you know, deal with her being dead or the remains, or you know, maybe she was, you know, had something to do with Social Security. Maybe he was collecting money or something, you know. There's just, with no evidence or no any kind of, you know, foul play being involved. One of the detectives said, well, maybe he, you know, put a pillow over her and just suffocated her or something like that, you know. And he said, well, that could have been a possibility for sure, but there's a million different possibilities that could have happened. And he said in all of his time in Portland and all of his detective work, that house is definitely one of the spookiest ones he's ever been in. When he said he went into that room and basically that door opened up and it creaked, you know, because the door hinges and everything were all rusted out, and big old solid thick wooden door. And he said when he opened that door, he just knew something wasn't right. And man, that's just so creepy. That's definitely something like straight out of a horror movie. But that's going to do it from Southeast Portland. I wanted to take you guys down here and give you guys a creepy little tale with Halloween coming up. But that's a true story, and I'll do my best, if not already as the story goes, to insert some of the news clip articles and just little things that I found. There wasn't too much info available, but I'll do my best to insert some of the newspaper articles and what have you. But that's going to do it from Southeast Portland. I love you guys very much for always creeping with. Make sure if you guys already haven't, you can hit that red subscribe button down below. You can do me one better and ring that bell as well. That way when I creep, you guys will be the first to creep. It is a beautiful neighborhood, I have to say. Southeast Portland is my favorite part of Portland. Lived here for many years, and like I said, just a ton of history. But that that story in that house pretty much takes the cake. So love you guys. Creeper out for now. Peace.